I'd spend a little bit of time just telling you a little bit about the IRPP, what we do and how we do it. And then I'll be happy to take questions afterwards. We're celebrating our 40th year this year. We were founded in 1972. We were actually a product of the 1968 throne speech of Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who wanted to establish a research institute that was outside of government and more significantly independent of government. And so our structure is a bit different than most other think tanks in Canada in that our primary source of funding is from an endowment, which was created in the early 1970s, roughly equal shares between federal government, provincial governments, and corporations and individuals. And our annual budget is essentially a draw from that endowment fund. And so we have no members. We do not have we do not have sources of funding that are transitory and are at risk. And that was the fundamental structure of the IRPP that was desired, so that we have the independence to do the work we want, set our own agendas as other think tanks do. But our studies, we can allow our authors to come to their own conclusions, even if they may not be they may not reflect the views of our board, for instance. We don't have members that can sort of come back to us and say, well, wait a minute, you know, we're not so sure this study comes to the conclusions that we sort of see in this particular area. So our independence that stems from that is something that we value very highly. In terms of our size, we are a very small organization. We have about 15 people. And our model, like most models, except probably with the exception of the conference board, is we commission research by outside experts on the areas of interest, on the areas of research that we're focusing on. And so we do not actually write much research. I, as a research director, actually write very little research. So in terms of what this means for this audience is that there's not really room at the IRPP for full-time researchers whose primary work is to engage in research, write up results, and publish their studies. Our role is more as a broker between research that is being done in academia and elsewhere and the policymaking community. And our job is to take that research and have our authors draw out the policy analysis and policy conclusions that we then publish and disseminate to our primary audiences, which are, as you may guess, policymakers in Ottawa and the provinces and municipalities, but as well the educated lay public, because part of our role is to spark debate about public policy issues more broadly in Canadian society. So, so that's how we function. We are we study many different issues. We are not an issue-specific think tank, and the issues we study sort of parallel the issues that are of importance to Canada, and they have evolved over the years. Our current areas of study are focused in three general areas. One is on immigration, integration, and diversity, and we're looking at questions about immigration. The program started after 9/11. Its initial focus was on balancing the issues of immigration and migration more generally against human rights. So, of course, you remember there were issues of who do we let in and who do we don't, who do we not let in. So coming back to human rights, we did a lot of research on the rights of migrants, selection processes, the degree to which you can use security certificates, detain people without being charged, this sort of thing. That has evolved into more of integration of immigrants into Canadian society. So we've done a lot of work on the economic outcomes of recent immigrants compared to immigrants further in the past, how well or not they are doing. We've done work on the second generation, that is the children of immigrants. How are they doing relative to their Canadian peers? And right now we're moving into the kind of social integration of immigrants. And so looking at the degree to which immigrants participate in civic life. Are they involved in the NGO sector, for instance? To what extent are they, do they hold elected office? What is the role of immigrant communities in Canada? Are they more of a help in helping new immigrants integrate into Canadian society, or are they more like ghettos in that in common it's possible to live inside a community without becoming part of the larger Canadian society. So that's one area of research. Second area of research revolves around aging, a lot of diverse different aspects of aging. What we're focusing on currently is on pension reform. We've published over the last couple of years about a dozen studies on various aspects of pension reform. We're now looking at labor market issues more broadly of older workers. Obviously pension reform plays into that, but the degree to which older workers stay in the labor force versus retire, and what are the incentives facing them in terms of staying in the labor force, and how does that connect with the overall macroeconomic future for Canada? Because as we all know, in an aging society, it's important from an economic perspective to try to encourage people to stay in the labor force. And so that's another sort of subsection under the aging. And then the third piece of the aging is more related to healthcare issues. We're doing a number of studies on long-term care and how the Canadian healthcare system needs to evolve from sort of acute treatment, things like that. We need to think about how are the aging baby boomers, how are they going to be cared for? Is our healthcare system well suited now to do that? Does it have the infrastructure for long-term care? And then finally, and this is an example of an issue where the IRPP's independence is an asset for us, we're looking at end-of-life issues broadly speaking. So this is things, the right to die, issues around euthanasia, also issues around the delivery of healthcare services at the end of life, because that obviously there's a fiscal aspect to that, there's an ethical aspect to that. These are very tough, sort of hot-button questions. And it's very difficult to raise in a lot of other contexts. Our status as an independent institute, being able to commission authors to write and draw their own conclusions without fear of backlash, whether it's from our board or anybody else, we're able to do that. So that's a piece of the aging. The piece that I'm responsible for is around economic issues called competitiveness, productivity, and economic growth. You know, the recession and the rise of China, weakness in the United States are all kind of tectonic shifts that have profound implications for the Canadian economy. In addition, the high energy prices, we see very large regional imbalances between growth. We see the increasing prosperity and strength of Alberta in particular, but the West in general. At the expense of, if you will, the sort of manufacturing heartland here in Quebec and in Ontario. And the issues we're looking at are, one is the issue of slow productivity growth in Canada. Productivity is important both to strengthen the manufacturing sector in Ontario and Quebec, but more broadly from a macroeconomic perspective. Since we have a slowing labor force, the sources of long-term growth are going to have to come increasingly from better productivity, because they're not going to come from the labor force growth that we've seen over the last 10 to 20 years. So we're doing a lot of work on the determinants of innovation and productivity, the degree to which competitive pressures play into that, the role of government policies in terms of programs to support R&D and innovation is a big part of that. And we're also embarking on some work on the energy sector in Canada. Its importance from a macroeconomic perspective, its importance as a potential driver of innovation and productivity both within the sector and more broadly in the economy, and also touching on some of these issues that I just mentioned about the disequilibrium in terms of growth prospects in different regions of the country, and to what extent policies need to adjust to make sure that we don't sort of grow apart rather than we grow together as a country. So that's where we are now, and like I said, the way we operate is that much as the conference board does and other think tanks, we sort of set the agenda. We do have a board of directors which sort of reflects the political spectrum, is a very active and engaged board, but they are reactive to what we propose rather than directive in what directions we should take. And so so in terms of daily life at a think tank, you know, I come back to what I said about our model. Our model is identifying research questions, identifying the experts in Canada or elsewhere who are best equipped to answer those questions, and commissioning them to write a study, participate in a conference, whatever vehicle we determine to be the most effective for the particular issue. Which means that we're a small organization of 15 people, but our output, you know, we're putting out 15, 20, 25 studies a year, we're holding events. We can only do that because of the people in academia and elsewhere who have the expertise to be able to provide to us so that we can play our role as information broker from the sort of basic research that's being done elsewhere to the applied policy analysis that policymakers need. So we are in constant contact with academics, people like yourselves, who are doing research that's of interest to us. But by the same token, we have essentially no people in-house who are full-time researchers who are working on a particular issue, because that model just doesn't work for us. Because one, our budget is too small, and two, most importantly, is the issues we study change over time. Because we're not an issue-specific think tank, we really don't have the space to do that kind of thing.